these critical investments. And thank God for organizations like the Annapolis and the Anne Arundel County Chamber of Commerce, because they have a very practical perspective on this. If you talk to these local chambers of commerce, they understand we have to take a balanced approach. They understand there has to be continued investment in local communities and that the federal government can be a partner in that in terms of making sure that there is funding for places like Anne Arundel Community College so that we can educate the next generation and educate people that are changing careers and trying to get positioned for the next economic opportunity. So while we have to find savings, while we have to be careful and diligent and prudent in the way we spend taxpayer money, we don't want to give up on important investments.
Thank you. And Mr. Drogas, final rebuttal on this question of jobs.
Well, I just want to reiterate, the federal government cannot produce jobs. The jobs that they produce are paid for by the American people. Every job that's produced by the government is coming off of taxpayer money. There is no wealth building positions created by the government. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next question will be on the deficit. This is directed first to Mr. Sarbanes. Some economists say that a quick reduction in spending by the U.S. government in an effort to reduce the federal budget deficit will slow the economy to such a point that growth will be reduced, tax revenues decrease, and the debt to the GDP ratio won't improve. Do you favor continued maintaining of spending now and a long-term plan to gradually reduce the debt, or would it be better to move aggressively to reduce the debt in the short term?
I think we got to be very, very careful about contracting our spending in a significant way in this economic climate. It doesn't mean we don't continue to be smart and careful about where taxpayer money is going. But I supported the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which actually brought $500 million of investment into the community colleges across the country, including nearly $20 million to Anne Arundel Community College, because I regarded that as an investment that would help to keep spurring the economy forward. And if you want a lesson in what happens if you contract too quickly, if you implement a policy of extreme austerity, all you have to do is look at what's going on in Europe right now. Our unemployment rate right now is 7.8%, which is too high by all accounts, and we need to continue to try to bring that unemployment rate down. But in Europe, in the Eurozone, where they have implemented over the last couple of years a policy of extreme austerity, the unemployment rate is now over 11% and climbing. And that's the effect of an economic policy that is sort of arbitrarily contracting the economy. So to your point, I think, yes, we have to, over the long term, have a plan to bring down our deficit and our debt. And actually, the Democrats introduced such a budget in Congress at the beginning of this year. Of course, it didn't see the light of day. But in the short term, we have to be very careful that we're balancing our prudence over the taxpayer expenditure with maintaining the investments that will actually get the economy going again.
Thank you. Mr. Drogas, 2-minute statement.
Yeah, I believe that we didn't get into this overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. But I think that there are drastic cuts that can be made to move us closer to a balanced budget and some deficit reduction. One in particular thing is cutting the F-35 program, which I'm just referring to my notes. It says that we are going to be spending $1.5 trillion on over the next couple of years. And when I was looking into this, I found out that they had a vote recently in Congress that, well, actually it was earlier this year, on an alternative engine program. And the alternative engine program was going to cost this country $3 billion over the next several years. Now, even President Obama said that this was an unnecessary and extravagant expense. And I was just wondering why Mr. Sarbanes voted to continue this program.
We'll get that in rebuttal. Mr. Knowles.
We have a pending problem coming towards us, and it involves some major players in the international markets. China and the Russians have decided that they're going to no longer trade their oil for dollars. This is a significant economic impact to us, because when those dollars that have been floating in the market for so long begin to come back to our shores, we're going to see inflation and economic turmoil in this country like we haven't seen in a very long time. So, no, we cannot pull the rug out from people immediately. That would be irresponsible as far as to cut back on all of our spending right now. There's no way it can be done, and there's no way that if you elected any of us for Congress, if we had that intention, that we could do that overnight, because we have to convince 434 other people to go along with us. But in this country, we need to change the vernacular here to start thinking about the fact that we need to prepare our private economy for what's going to be a major impact. We can no longer, burn the candle at both ends, spend and allow for inflation to continue on the path that it's going, because we're setting ourselves up for a recipe for disaster. We need to now look at stopping this so that we can allow for our private industry, because as we've stated here a couple times tonight, government doesn't do anything to enhance the private industry. It can only take away from it if it gets involved in it. So it needs to start getting out of the way and allow us to shore those private industries up so that we can have a strong economy when those dollars come back to roost.
We have time now, Mr. Sarbanes. Rebuttal?
Well, a couple of things. The statement government doesn't do anything to enhance private industry is just flat wrong. I mean, look at the area that we're living in right here. We have a huge number of defense contractors whose business is driven largely by investments in our defense, our national defense, and the spin-off of jobs in this area. I mean, you look at Fort Meade and NSA and all of the contractor community that is around those commitments is huge in terms of being an economic driver for Anne Arundel County, for Maryland, and for this entire region. With respect to the F-35, there's actually a very legitimate and vigorous debate going on about whether you go with a sole source provider of this or whether you continue to have a competing set of contracts in terms of what's the most economically efficient way to proceed forward. And members of Congress and the White House have some legitimate differences on that question. I do agree that we can look at certain of the weapons programs and other things within our defense budget with a little more careful eye for some potential savings, and we ought to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Drogas. Rebuttal, sir.
The only thing I can say to that is that, from what I've read, Mr. Sarbanes was more interested in the 1,000 jobs that this one particular engine would create, the excessive spending to create 1,000 jobs was just over the top. Anytime that, to complain about, $4 billion in tax subsidies for oil companies and then spend $1.5 trillion for a jet that's, by some estimates, not even needed. We already have F-22s that can handle more or less everything that the F-35 can do, other than some air-to-ground missions. So I just don't. I see this as just a overall problem with the government spending. It doesn't matter if it's defense. It doesn't matter which department it's in. It's overspending just to spend. So,
Mr. Knowles, rebuttal on this question.
Yes, a couple of things were brought up. Defense was brought up, and on that we can agree, because that's actually one of the things that constitutionally the federal government is supposed to do. So yes, there are some things that have a spin-off effect from the government doing the job that it's supposed to actually do. The other thing was he mentioned earlier about money to college, and I just want to bring this point up because this was brought up in our last forum. The fact that we have started federally funding colleges, as far as backing the loans, as far as providing for the grants, is what has helped for colleges to raise the tuition and strap the students with a higher debt. So this is something that we need to really not drop off the face of the earth, as unfortunately was stated, mistakenly said, quoted to me as saying in the last one, but it needs to be something that we can't continue down the same path that's a cyclical path of increasing the money that we pay to students, so that college will increase the tuition, so we increase the money, so we increase tuition. Because once again, you have to ask, where does the money come from?
Real quick, I've been real generous with letting everybody go over time. Let's stick to 2 minutes and then the 1 minute rebuttal when we go. You read my mind because the next question is about financial aid, federal loans, things like that. And this is for Mr. Drogas first. It's on education. In order to stay economically competitive internationally, the United States requires an educated workforce. About 1/3 of the students at Anne Arundel Community College receive federal grants, and 20% use federal loans to pay for at least part of their education. What should be the federal government's role in providing financial aid for higher education?
The federal government does not have a role in education. I know that that's not a popular viewpoint, but you know, the issue is is that the more involved government has gotten in college, especially with college tuitions, all that they have done has raised college tuitions by 295% over the last 20 years. And I mean, that's excessive by any standards. It's more than housing, more than health costs, more than just about every other industry out there. And the reason that the colleges are allowed to do this is because of the federal loans and because of the Pell Grants. When the colleges have no reason to believe that they're not going to get paid in the end, they have no reason to lower their tuition. You know, it's a simple, it's simple economics. It's a supply and demand system. If you don't supply the excessive amounts of money out there to these colleges to take in, they will have to reduce their tuitions to accommodate the students coming in. So if for us to be spending the amount of money that we do every year on education, when, by simply removing it, it would most likely, over the course of a couple years, the colleges would have to come back down in tuition.
Same question, Mr. Sarbanes.
Well, it's an interesting concept that you can make expenses go down by just reducing the amount of money people have to spend on things. I'm not sure that economically that makes a whole lot of sense. I think it's important to maintain a federal partnership with respect to education, and that includes providing support for grants and student loans to help young people take that next step. The cruelest trick you can play on a young person, on their family, is to have them do everything that's been asked of them, to work hard, to play by the rules, to excel in school, and then when it comes time to take that next step, because of means, they can't make that step. That basically cuts off their dream right there. We talked earlier about rebuilding the American dream. Educational opportunity is fundamental to that. Now, Mr. Knowles has an interesting observation about you can get into this vicious cycle, whereas tuitions go up and then the support for tuition increases to cover that. It kind of feeds on itself. And, we got to be careful about that. But that's not what we're talking about here. I mean, still the amount of aid that's available to students that are trying to seek higher education is not keeping up with the expense. And you certainly can't point to community colleges in making that argument, because they are still, I think, very reasonable in terms of the tuition costs that are being offered in return for a first-rate education. So I think the kinds of investments that are reflected in what this particular community college benefits from are ones that we ought to maintain.
Mr. Knowles.
Actually, the only reason why I could afford to go here to community college because it was the most affordable place to be able to go. I am gracious that it is also one of the best in the country, better than a lot of higher cost campuses out there. But I want to start off with, it's a quote, favorite quote of mine, which is, "It's no true measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." So while we're arguing about all these symptoms of a bigger problem that we need to have government come in and take care of, all these small symptoms, this is what gives our congressmen, busybody jobs to do, but not addressing the actual problem. And the problem still boils down to your money, because every exchange is how much your money is worth versus what kind of products, goods, and services you're getting for that. And that involves our money creation system, which unfortunately my opponent here voted against opening up and looking inside the Federal Reserve to see why everything in our system has become more expensive. Because it's not only college tuition. We're talking about how things have been going up in prices. Yes, college tuition has been outpacing it because the federal government has been priming that pump and fueling that along by giving more of the actual taxpayer money directly to the system, but indirectly, an even bigger problem, which is the more systemic problem, is the fact that we have our monetary policy that is absolutely out of control. Since the Federal Reserve's inception in 1913, almost 100 years ago, the dollar has lost 97% of its value. That means everything in our society goes up. That means our gas goes up, bread, I've said it before, eggs, everything, whatever, healthcare, you name it. But instead of looking at those particular problems, we're going to focus on this microcosm of a problem, which is a problem of the tuitions going up. But if we bury our heads in the sand and say that it's okay for the Federal Reserve to do this type of thing to us, and we're just going to give Congress more power to fix and tinker around the system, we're never going to fix it. Never. So we have to focus on the problem and not focus on the symptoms in the problem.
1 minute rebuttal, Mr. Drogas.
I believe that the state is where most of the funding should come from. And when you're looking at something like a community college has a lot of opportunities for in-state tuition. They have a lot